Welcome back to Fashion here. So time for my power rankings for the 2024 Singapore Grand Prix. I apologize for not getting a review out for either qualifying or the race. I was traveling and wasn't really able to find time to make a video in a timely fashion. I could have made a review for the race now, but given that it basically happened almost 2 days ago, I figured let's just stick with power rankings. So starting with power rankings this weekend, Singapore Grand Prix, that wasn't that exciting. It was kind of what we expected. It was a qualifying race with some mix-up in the pit stops and some strategy differences, but for the most part, it's about what you normally get in Singapore. So without further ado, let's start at number 20. So number 20, I think there's a lot of drivers you could put at number 20, to be honest, but I'm going to go with Lance Stroll. Qualified 17th, out-qualified by his teammate Fernando Alonso by 0.4 of a second. Not a great qualifying session. Really thought that he should have at least gone into Q2. And then in the race, made up a couple positions, finished P14 on the road. Number 19, this is a tough one in what could be his last Grand Prix, and based on some of the body language, some of his interviews after the Grand Prix, it makes it sound like someone at Red Bull's told him, "Yep, this is your last one." But to be honest, I kind of hope that he would have been able to see out the season. But looking like that's perhaps not going to be the case, and that is, of course, Daniel Ricciardo. Tough weekend for the Aussie driver. Qualified 16th, out-qualified by his teammate Yuki Tsunoda by 3.5 of a second. Bit of a different strategy, starting on the soft tires and then trying to do a two-stop strategy on a circuit where basically doing anything more than what's the minimum, which is a one-stop, never really gets you very far. So for Ricciardo, I don't think the strategy really helped him, but the qualifying definitely hurt him. And yeah, all in all, I don't think it was a great weekend for Ricciardo. Number 18, put the board down. Alright, Sergio Perez. So for Perez, a really tough weekend. Qualifying, bit of a disaster. Qualified 13th, out-qualified by his teammate Max Verstappen by 0.9 of a second. Really a session that he didn't need to have on a weekend that, surprisingly, for the first time in a while, the Red Bull actually looked like it had pace as shown by Max Verstappen. So a bit of a tough qualifying session for Perez, which of course held him back in the Grand Prix. Recovered up to 10th, got a single point, but I think he'll still be disappointed to finish behind both Hülkenberg and Alonso, two drivers in much slower cars than his Red Bull. Number 17. Number 17, I'm going to go with Kevin Magnussen. So for Magnussen, bit of an anonymous weekend, on a weekend where the Haas definitely looked very, very quick, arguably the 5th best car this weekend, and Magnussen didn't really make full use of that package, I felt. He qualified 14th, out-qualified by his teammate Nico Hülkenberg by 0.5 second, and then DNF'd from the race very, very late on with what seemed like some kind of mechanical issue. Also had a bit of an oopsie where he hit the wall, gave himself a puncture as well. There were a couple drivers as well who had ooped a bit, caused some small mistakes, but Magnussen's was one of the few that actually had consequences. Number 16, I'm going to go with Pierre Gasly. So for Pierre Gasly, qualified 18th, out-qualified by 3.5 by his teammate Esteban Ocon. Didn't really make up that many positions in the race either. Finished 17th on the road behind both Saubers, which is notable given how poor Sauber have been this season. And yeah, another tough weekend for Gasly. It seems like they've been very, very inconsistent, where every weekend one Alpine driver is doing reasonably well, and then another Alpine driver is just nowhere. So it's kind of a strange one. And this weekend again, it was Gasly's turn to kind of be on the lower end of the stick at Alpine. Alright, so now into the third row, and I think for 15th, I'm going to put Zhou Guanyu. So for Zhou, he qualified 20th, out-qualified by his teammate Valtteri Bottas by 4.5 of a second. Then in the race, progressed up to 15th place, helped by some other drivers' misfortune. Bit of an anonymous Grand Prix. Thought the race itself was okay, and again beat his teammate Valtteri Bottas in the race. But with how close those the two Saubers were on track, and with how far apart they were in qualifying, I kind of felt it was difficult to justify putting Zhou ahead of Bottas, where felt like it's so random which one finishes ahead of the other, and with how inconsequential both of their races are, and where it feels like qualifying is really the only chance for either of them to stand out, and even then they're not really even able to do that. And again, kind of like I mentioned, number 14, I'm going to put Bottas. Qualifying, I think, went okay. Qualified 19th, but out-qualified his teammate Joe by 4.5 tenths of a second, and then came home 16th on the road. Not really a whole lot more to add for the Sauber driver, other than I thought they were, okay. They were pretty close to each other, except for qualifying, which is why I have Bottas ahead of Joe. But again, not poor either. Number 13. Again, this might seem high, but I'm going to put Carlos Sainz. So again, the big moment of his weekend was qualifying, obviously, where he had that crash in the first run of Q3, caused that red flag, which caused then everyone else to only be able to do one running in the final part of qualifying. Again, a bit of a mistake, and definitely hurt Ferrari's chances this weekend on a weekend where they looked pretty good. I think you could easily justify having Gasly further, or having Sainz in that bottom row, but I felt all these drivers had pretty poor weekends as well. In the Grand Prix itself, definitely made progress up the field. Ended up finishing 7th on track, which I think is a decent recovery drive. A couple positions behind his teammate. So again, not the Grand Prix itself was not terrible given where he started, but yeah, obviously that crash in qualifying definitely overshadowing his weekend. Number 12. I'm going to go with Alex Albon. So for Albon, qualified 11th, out-qualified his teammate Franco Colapinto by 0.07 of a second. Ended up DNFing pretty early on the race, was one of the first stoppers, and then complained about some kind of overheating issue and was forced to retire pretty early on. The only mechanical issue, I would say, really. Then of course you had Magnussen later on, but really the only true mechanical issue, I would say, of the Grand Prix. Bit of a tough weekend for Albon. I think they definitely had more potential, a bit more pace, and had a really unfortunate start. I think obviously his teammate Colapinto went very, very aggressive at the start into that first corner, kind of cost Albon several positions. But again, it's kind of hard to predict those things, especially when you're driving in your third Grand Prix. So for Albon, tough weekend, and he'll be looking ahead to our last 6 races of the season. Number 11. Number 11, I'm going to go with Esteban Ocon. Qualified 15th, out-qualified his teammate Pierre Gasly 3.5 tenths. Qualifying, I think, went pretty well. In the Grand Prix, no points, finished 13th on the road. Not able to get points, pretty anonymous Grand Prix, not a whole lot more to add. But, he was pretty close to the bottom of the points, or like basically to the bottom of the points, so he wasn't completely out of it. But I think, compared, based on what we know Alpine is able to do right now, I think it was a decent Grand Prix by Ocon. Now into the top 10 we go, into the second row. At number 10, I'm going to put Colapinto. So for Colapinto, he qualified 12th. Out-qualified by his teammate Albon by 0.07 of a second. Very, very close. I've been very, very impressed with Colapinto's one-lap pace. The fact that he's been able to get this close to Albon so early on in ways that Sargent basically struggled to get even this close after a year and a half, I think really is a testament to how well he's been able to adapt to F1 machinery. And definitely trying to make a case for himself to maybe have a seat at Sauber for 2025. But that's a discussion for another day. Maybe went a bit too aggressive at the start, but again, he didn't make contact with anyone, kept it clean, and yeah, so I think it's kind of hard to fault him for that. Number 9. Number 9, I'm going to go with Yuki Tsunoda, qualified 8th, out-qualified his teammate Daniel Ricciardo by 3.5 tenths of a second. In the race, finished 12th on the road. I think qualifying, very, very good job, kind of made the best out of the pack, got the most out of the package. In the race, I felt like he was really hamstrung by the strategy he was given. I think pitted too late and then ended up pitting on the soft tires, which I thought was a really strange move to go, especially as they had more than half the race left. So I think a pity for Tsunoda that he wasn't able to convert that really good qualifying session. First really good session for Tsunoda in a long time, into some points, but unfortunately that's the way it is. So yeah, but I still think overall pretty good weekend for Tsunoda, so that's why I have him in 9th. Number 8, I'm going to go with Lewis Hamilton. So for Hamilton, qualifying went quite well this weekend. Qualified 3rd, out-qualified his teammate Russell by 0.02 of a second. So again, very, very close, but really good session for Hamilton. In the race, decided to start on the medium tire, on the soft tire, pitted quite early, and then for whatever reason, even on the new tires compared to Russell ahead on the worn tires, he wasn't really able to make up any ground on his teammate. So I think that's a bit frustrating. I think Hamilton will want to understand where exactly things went wrong. Didn't look like he was carrying damage either, and then just kind of lost ground, lost pace compared to his competitors around him, and then ended up finishing in 6th. So a bit of a disappointing Grand Prix for Hamilton, especially compared to where he started. And yeah, he'll definitely be looking forward, I think, to joining Ferrari next year, given that they've had a bit of a turnaround. Obviously not this weekend, but last 3 or 4 races they've definitely been in much better form. Number 7. Number 7, I think I'm going to go with George Russell. George Russell at number 7. So for Russell, qualified 4th, out-qualified by his teammate Lewis Hamilton by 0.02 of a second. Finished 4th on the road. I think pretty good Grand Prix, all things considered. And I think, Mercedes perhaps not having the pace of the other cars around them, which is, why they fell back a bit in the race. But still, I think decent Grand Prix by Russell. Now for number 6, I've decided to go with Charles Leclerc. I think you could easily have Leclerc and Russell swap the other way around. I was definitely considering that myself on my notes here. But for Leclerc, he qualified 9th, out-qualified his teammate by 3.5 of a second. Of course, this is from their Q2 times, as those are the times that ended up determining which order they started in, because neither of them set a time in Q3. I think for Leclerc, really unfortunate to have that track limit, basically the track limit deletion for his one run in Q3. Otherwise, would have started in the top 5. So again, small mistake, big consequences in terms of grid position, and that obviously had big ramifications for his ability to recover in the Grand Prix. But I think for Leclerc, it's very, very small mistake, big consequences. But I think nonetheless, in the race itself, he did a really, really good job. Got his way back up to 5th, and at points looked close to challenging Russell, who of course had much better grid position at the start of the race compared to him. All right, number 5. Number 5, we're going to go with Oscar Piastri. So for Piastri, qualified 5th, out-qualified by his teammate Lando Norris by about 4.5 seconds. Or no, not 4.5 seconds, 4.5 tenths of a second. 4.5 tenths. I need to get my digits right, or my units right. So yeah, out-qualified by 4.5 tenths. Qualifying, I think, a bit of a struggle in Singapore. It's something that's definitely, I think, this entire season, I think it's the one thing. Last year, it was race pace, and was really quite obvious that race pace was where he had his biggest disadvantage to Norris. This year, starting to feel like qualifying, or at least getting that last 1%, that last tenth, seems to be where Piastri struggles a bit. I think qualifying was a bit disappointing, given that they definitely had the fastest car. Ideally, you want to be starting in the first 2 or 3 spots, but for Piastri, obviously not able to do so. And then in the race, recovered to P3, pretty good result there. Obviously showed the very, very strong pace that McLaren had at this track, and I think did a decent job getting on the podium, made some nice overtakes as well. Number 4, I'm going to go with Nico Hülkenberg. So for Hülkenberg, excellent qualifying session. Qualified P6, out-qualified his teammate by 0.5 seconds. Bit of a disappointing Grand Prix, fell backward to 9th and got jumped by Fernando Alonso in that midfield battle. But for Hülkenberg, I think, doing a really, really good job in that Haas. Probably a little bit disappointed that he wasn't ahead of Alonso, given that I think the Haas is a little bit better car right now. But, that being said, I think he'll still be happy with some solid points. Number 3, go with Fernando Alonso. Qualified 7th, out-qualified his teammate Lance Stroll by 0.4 of a second. Finished the race in 8th. I think really good job there. Best of the rest result for him. I think he's been on a very, very good run of form. It's just unfortunately, unlike last year, the car is much, much slower. Not able to show his speed, his form in this year's car. Now that leaves number 1, number 2. Lando Norris, Max Verstappen. I think both of them were very, very good. That being said, I do think that Lando Norris was in a league of his own this weekend. Qualified on pole, out-qualified his teammate by 4.5 tenths of a second. No, not 4.5 seconds, 4.5 tenths. and then came very, very close to getting a Grand Slam, only for it to be taken away by Daniel Ricciardo on the last lap. And when you have basically such a perfect weekend results-wise, you know, pole, win, lead every lap, not getting fastest lap, it's very hard to go anywhere but first. You know, quite dominant, was like 27 seconds or so ahead of Verstappen at one point. Did have a couple of scary moments where it looked like he might go into the wall. I've seen other people not have basically dropped him behind Verstappen on their power rankings because of that. I'm going to be a little bit more lenient. I think just because of, you know, how it was such a complete weekend by Norris, I'm still going to put him ahead of Verstappen. But that being said, for Verstappen, very, very good weekend. I think made the most out of the Red Bull package. Qualified P2 when I think they themselves didn't expect to be that high up on the grid. And then in the race, very, very good pace, just kind of doing his own thing. Very, very reminiscent of 2020 in many ways, where clearly not the fastest car, but just kind of having a very solid race and doing his own thing to come home for a P2. So there you go, there's my power rankings for the 2024 Singapore Grand Prix. Not the best Grand Prix, and now we unfortunately have this 1 month break in the calendar because of kind of the regionalization, rescheduling that they've been doing to try to make things a bit more eco-friendly on the surface, although I think in reality it's not actually helping that much. Power rankings I think might look a little bit different next time out when we get to COTA. I'm thinking about making some small changes, not to the way the power rankings themselves, but to how things are presented. So we'll see if that comes to fruition in a month's time. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.